Thanks for joining us. My name is Chris Fletcher. I'm the Director of Policy and Communications at Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce, and it's great to see everyone here today for our quarter economic update for Q4 2020. This is our last formal event as a Chamber of Commerce this year, and what has been an unusual, very trying and challenging year. We've got most of the bad bits. Can I just ask everyone please to mute the mics, and we don't get any sort of funny interference and noises. Thank you. Like I said, we've been through a real roller coaster of years. Everybody has, I think, and there's probably, unfortunately, maybe some more to come in 2021, but we'll get into that in due course. What the purpose of today is obviously to look at the last quarter's economic performance and to find out what's actually going on within the business community at the present moment in time. Just a quick reminder, as I said, please mute your mics, and then we don't get any interference when Subrah's doing the presentation. We are recording the event, so just please also bear that in mind. Can I just ask Subrah, can you just move on please on the slide? Thank you very much. There, he's a well-trained assistant there, and he's obviously doing a great job. Before I hand over to him, what we're going to do is somebody can just move on again, please. Thanks. Before we move on to that, I just thought it'd be worthwhile just reminding everyone about the quarterly economic survey, which forms the basis of the quarterly economic briefing. And obviously, this is a survey that's been going on for a long time, well over 20-30 years, and it's the largest and most reliable business confidence survey in the UK. It's the first to be published every quarter with what the local economy is doing. But it's also as well one of the most representative from the point of view of the size of the survey. It's not just, a dozen or so businesses saying something that immediately gets translated into what the local business community is saying as a whole. There's several hundred responses every quarter we get for this, and at a national level there's several thousand responses from businesses as well. So size certainly does matter. Now, reliable is it? It is very reliable. We've had some I wouldn't say successes in the past, that's probably not the right word to describe them, but certainly in the past we've foreseen certain things happening around the local economy and the national economy as well, where recessions have started. We've been able to pin that exact point where things started to happen with that. And we've also said when there hasn't been a recession as well, way back in 2012, there was all sorts of talks about a double dip recession. We said at the time that actually there wouldn't be, from what the information our members that the business community were telling us. We said there isn't going to be a double dip recession. We got laughed at, and hey presto, we were proven right a couple of years later. Does being first matter? Yes, it actually does, because we all know that official data comes out, but it's usually 3 or 4 months out of date. And in such a rapidly fast changing environment that we are in at the present moment in time, we think it's quite important that we get that data out to people as quickly as possible. So it's almost real time with what's going on within the local economy. We're not having to wait 3 or 4 months. It's in front of people, and we can act on it very, very quickly. So what do we do with it? It's quite important that we don't just sit on this data and produce some graphs and say, oh yeah, this looks good or this looks bad. We've got to use it for a particular purpose. So Subrah will introduce in a minute to take you through the rest of the presentation and give the results. For example, he was on a call early this week and has been involved in the last couple of weeks with calls with various government departments, the Bank of England, the British Chambers of Commerce, all imparting that information to them so they can make the big decisions around the economy. We use it locally as well. We've just recently inputted a consultation response to the plans for a Greater Manchester Clean Air Zone. And while we agree that the air quality needs improving, we've also put a note of caution in there from the results from our survey work to say, look, businesses are being battered left, right and centre. During the height of the pandemic, from the information we gathered, we were down to 40% of businesses had less than 1 month's worth of cash left. 75% of businesses are still seeing a huge reduction in sales. Now is not the time to be asking them to invest more money, no matter what the purpose is for. Quality is important, like I said, but now is not the right time to say that business has the cash to invest in the improvements that are needed. So we put that note of caution in there directly from what our members, you in the business community, were telling us. So we do something with it, and it is quite important. If we just move on, please, Subrah. So the quarterly economic briefing, we're going to cover the QES data and also the Greater Manchester Business Monitor that we've been running right the way through from the end of March when lockdown first started. We're going to be covering the Greater Manchester Index and looking at all those other issues as well. And the Greater Manchester Index is a combination of 7 key QES measures that best indicate the overall performance of the Greater Manchester economy. There's domestic sales and orders, international sales and orders, confidence in turnover, confidence in profitability, and capacity utilisation. We put all that together to give us the results that we've got, that I'm now going to ask Subrah, our Head of Research, to take us through the rest of the presentation to find out what actually is going on within the local economy. After that, there will be an opportunity to ask questions on anything that you hear. So Subrah, over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. Thank you to all of you who are attending this morning, and of course, special thanks to those of you who have filled in the surveys. Since we started the Business Monitor series of surveys earlier in March, just as the pandemic struck, we have gathered the views of over 2,000 businesses, and the data we have gathered, the insights we have drawn therefrom, have been of immense value. And as Chris has just said, we use it in our work, but it is also being used to lobby on your behalf. So it is extremely important that you have filled in the survey. So thank you very much. And the other thing is, the data comes from you, so you have given us your responses, and what I'm doing today is, of course, I'm presenting an analysis of the data, but then the rest of the commentary is all based on just using the responses that you have given us. So special thanks to those of you who have filled in the survey, and of course, QES season for 2021 will come around in about 2 months' time, so please do fill in the survey when it comes around. Okay, so before I get on to the actual QES results, just a little bit of context and background to where we are at the moment. And as you all know, there is no doubt about this, the coronavirus pandemic has delivered probably the most adverse shock in peacetime to the local, regional, national, and global economies. The pandemic response has also had a unique feature, and this is what is different from other recessions. Usually in other recessions, businesses get affected, demand goes down. But in the context of the coronavirus pandemic, we have had to impose supply side constraints, meaning businesses have been forced to close. Hospitality business cannot have customers come in. And that poses some serious difficulties for how we handle the crisis. And those supply side constraints combined with the difficulties that businesses have faced has caused a rising unemployment, prompting a very serious response from government. But the response has been also expensive, nearly 300 billion worth of response measures, funded primarily through borrowing. So public sector finances will also need to be looked into at some point of time. But the key risk, and perhaps from an economy point of view, the primary objective is to prevent what is called economic scarring. In other words, permanent damage to the economy, permanent damage to employment prospects, etc., as a result of the damage that coronavirus has caused. But one thing is clear, and this might not necessarily be an entirely popular view, but the consensus amongst most economists is that as long as the virus is amidst us, public health restrictions will be required to control it, and there cannot be a real economic recovery without us beating the virus. And that, of course, means the vaccination program, mass rollout of the vaccination program, but it might also require some form of restrictions being in place. So recovery is not possible without us having gotten a clear handle over the virus. But then, this quarter's QES has got another special feature, which is that we finally think that this is going to be the last QES before Brexit. So the last QES, while the UK is still in some way connected with the EU. So come 31st of December, we are going to have Brexit, but we do not know whether we are going to have Brexit with a deal, Brexit without a deal, what type of deal, etc. And so at the moment, the economy is actually being impacted by the dual blow of COVID and Brexit. It causes uncertainty because businesses aren't necessarily prepared. But then a no deal scenario, which does seem likely now, will present both tariff and non-tariff barriers. So price rises, but also difficulties to the ease of doing business in the EU. So there might be lots of you who have dealings with European Union businesses. And so that's the economic context. I admit it does look a bit gloomy, but my job is to be true to the data and present the hard facts as they are. Okay, so where were we then in September? Now we know that the economy had the sharpest contraction in the second quarter of 2020. There was a modest improvement. So in the third quarter of 2020, when we presented the QES results in September, the Greater Manchester Index was at minus 9.2, and that was a 22-point improvement compared to the value in the second quarter of 2020. But importantly, please do remember, this line here is the zero line, the sort of slight gray line. And so all of the balances are in the negative, okay, for the Greater Manchester Index. And so please note, the value was at negative in September. But we also know that there was a significant improvement compared to the second quarter. So GDP went up by 15.5%. It was led by services, 14.2% improvement with wholesale, retail, etc., doing reasonably well, an 18.7% increase in manufacturing, and of course, construction output also went up. So that was the situation in September, in the third quarter of 2020. So where are we now? Now, as we have been repeatedly saying, and Chris has raised this again and again in various policy forums, Greater Manchester has been under some form of restrictions since the end of July. And things came to a head, as you will remember, in October. Greater Manchester got put in the third tier, so with lots of restrictions, hospitality businesses required to close. And then we had the subsequent national lockdown. So businesses were closed, demand went down, and as a result, economic activity has decreased. And therefore, the Greater Manchester Index for the fourth quarter of 2020 is minus 20.7. Okay. Now, through our recovery tracker surveys that we conducted in October and November, we have identified that demand levels started declining, and the balances are now similar to where they were in June, end of June, the early July. And so any gains that we have had over the summer have now been forfeit. Okay, so we are back to where we were towards the end of the second quarter, perhaps very early in the third quarter. And the value of the Greater Manchester Index at minus 20.7 is roughly comparable to where we were during the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. So the economy is still significantly smaller than it was in February. Manufacturing is lower by 21.4%. Services and construction are also lower, albeit by slightly smaller amounts. But please do remember, 80% of the UK economy is services. And unless there is a significant improvement in services, the possibility of overall economic growth still remains pessimistic. And that is what is the problem at the moment. Because of the current level of restrictions in Tier 3 in Greater Manchester, festive trading is going to be weak. On top of that, we might have Brexit shock, and therefore there is a lot of uncertainty and low levels of business confidence. Okay, so the outlook, as I was saying earlier, is not particularly cheerful, but the key message here is the Greater Manchester Index is at minus 20.7, which is 11 points lower than it was in the third quarter of 2020. So what is business confidence looking like? Now, I just mentioned business confidence, so let's begin with business confidence. Now, no surprises here. I have split the responses, as you can see, into the response type. So the increased responses, the remain the same responses, and the decreased responses. I've done that for both confidence turnover and profitability, confidence over profitability. Now, the area in red on both of these charts represents the negative response to the business confidence questions. For both turnover and profitability, the proportion of the decreased answers, the negative response to that question, has increased since September. So at the moment, for turnover confidence, 47% of the respondents to the last two recovery trackers, so recovery tracker 6, recovery tracker 7, and the QES, 47% of the respondents are now saying that they are not confident about maintaining revenues. And when it comes to profitability, the proportion is slightly higher. So 55% of the respondents are not confident that they will be able to maintain their margins and profitability. And the conclusion that we can draw from this picture is that there is a lot of uncertainty at the moment, uncertainty around the infection rates spreading, the public health response, the requirement, the absolute requirement to control the infection rates, restrictions on businesses versus opening up particular sectors, the reduction in demand that we have seen over the last few months, but I'll get to demand and cash flow in a moment, but that perfect cocktail for low levels of business confidence. So business confidence is low, and this is an extremely important measure because business confidence determines expansion, investment, employment, etc. And so we need to get business confidence up, but that requires policy responses from the government side. It also requires easing of the virus restrictions so that businesses can open in a safe, secure manner and then start trading, make that a journey towards a return to normalcy. So that's business confidence. What is domestic demand looking like? Now, these charts are presented in the usual QES balance style. So please do remember the numbers are balances, which is the difference between the proportion of the positive response to the question and the negative response to the question. And important thing to remember on both of these charts, the balances are well below the zero line. So this is the zero line, and so the balances are negative. What does that mean? It means that more businesses said that they are going to face a decline in domestic demand relative to the number of businesses that said that they might actually face an increase in demand. So at the moment, the majority of businesses are reporting decreases in domestic demand. That's true for sales, but it is also true for advance orders. So from somewhere in the kind of mid to low teens in this third quarter, we are now down to the mid 30s for both orders and sales. Not a particularly cheerful picture there. But as I've said before, the QES is a snapshot in time. So you get the movement between one quarter and the next. But we have the insights that we have drawn from our recovery tracker survey. So recovery tracker 6, which was in October, and then recovery tracker 7, which was the last week of October, and then the first couple of weeks of November. So please do note the declines started early in October. So tier 3 restrictions, national lockdown, etc. Those are the two factors which have contributed to where we are at the moment. So the balances are in the mid 30s, a significant reduction from the levels in the third quarter. Okay, so then what is the sectoral picture looking like? So on domestic sales, there have been decreases for all three sectors. Construction, services, and manufacturing have all declined. Now, nationally, there is a slight divergence appearing between manufacturing and the other sectors. So in some parts of the country, the manufacturing sector is doing significantly better than the services sector in that part of the country. Now, I think that is probably because of the sectoral mix in that particular area. In Greater Manchester, what we can see from the data is that all three sectors have suffered a slight decline. Okay, so within Greater Manchester, now for both domestic sales and domestic orders, who are the types of businesses that have been badly hit? There is absolutely no doubt about that. The consumer-facing businesses, that includes beauty salons, it includes hospitality, it includes leisure centers, gyms, etc. These are the businesses, the consumer-facing ones that have been badly hit. But businesses within the professional services sector, technology, IT, and financial services are the ones who have actually reported an increase in trade. But as I was saying earlier, the balances are negative. So those businesses who have reported declines, the negative response, are much higher in number compared to those businesses which have reported a slight increase in demand. And the other interesting thing that I have noticed is that in the free text comments, some manufacturing businesses are saying that they are approaching a stress point. So the response was, we have kept our businesses open all through the pandemic. We have tried our best. We have not necessarily put lots and lots of people on furlough because we have been trying to keep ourselves up and running. But because the overall economic situation has not improved significantly, it is a possibility that some businesses are approaching a sort of stress point. Manufacturing growth was led by chemicals and pharmaceuticals. Chemicals and pharmaceuticals, extremely important sectors, but two sectors which have a huge amount of reliance on trade with the EU. So a deal, which can ensure free trade between the UK and the EU is extremely important for continued success of the manufacturing sector, because chemicals, pharmaceuticals, auto trades, motor vehicle manufacturing, etc. Those are sectors with very tightly integrated supply chains. Okay, car registrations for the 12 months ending November 20 was 31% lower than in the 12 months ending November 2019. But of course, the sale of electric vehicles has increased. And then for the construction sector, the pipeline data that we have access to shows that there are lots of projects in the housing sector, but also in the private industrial sector, but then commercial development of office space and infrastructure projects are lagging behind somewhat. So that's the domestic demand picture broken down by sectors. What about international demand? Then there has been a slight quarterly decline in international demand. So between Q3 and Q4, this is not as marked a decline as in domestic demand, but there has been a decline. So the balances are now in the sort of early or mid 20s for export sales and export orders. But again, we have access to the recovery tracker data. That shows a lot of volatility. This might be down to the responses because some tracker surveys have had more responses from internationally active businesses than others. So there is some volatility in that chart on the right-hand side, but the overall message is domestic demand and international demand are now lower than they were in the third quarter of 2020. Can we verify this with other data? It turns out we can. And first thing to look into is the number of export documents processed by the chamber, which is a good barometer for international trade activity within Greater Manchester. So export documents processed in the chamber in October and November 2020 were 27% lower than they were in October and November 2019. And even allowing for seasonal fluctuations, the total for the fourth quarter will highly likely be smaller than they were compared to the third quarter. And again, export is increased marginally in October 2020, but then they are still lower than where they were in 2019. So international demand also declining compared to the third quarter of 2020. What's the sectoral picture? Somewhat similar, as domestic demand. Goods exports led by pharmaceuticals, motor vehicles, and precious metals. So precious metals movement is usually between one central bank and the other. So for we cannot necessarily treat it as exports which are made by businesses, but then within the services group, professional services and logistics are the two sectors which are likely to report increases in exports. That's based on the data that we have gathered over the last 3 months from the recovery tracker and the quarterly economic survey. So demand is low. What does that mean then for cash flow positions? Now, cash flow positions have been a long-standing concern for all sectors during this pandemic. And in both the recovery tracker series of surveys and the quarterly economic survey, you have told us, that cash remains a problem. And that's reflected in the results. So except for the construction sector, cash flow positions have actually declined on a quarterly basis. Again, that's what the recovery tracker data is also showing on the right-hand side. Okay, there was a marginal improvement in the beginning of October, which was reflected in that 6th recovery tracker, but then the 7th recovery tracker and then the QES are showing decline. So cash flow positions are now at minus 32 roughly, which is considerably lower than it was in the 3rd quarter. So that's the picture for all 3 subsector groups. Okay. And then what about capacity utilization? Now, capacity utilization is an extremely important macroeconomic indicator, because higher the capacity utilization, then the better it is for the economy, because it shows that businesses are actually active, trading, there is a lot of employment, etc. But there is a sectoral divergence here. Similar to cash flow, construction sector is doing better, has reported an increase in capacity to somewhere near 45%. And then services and manufacturing are on the lower side. Now, just a note, in some of these slides, I have not included the construction responses. So, for example, export sales, export orders. That's because of the very small number of responses from construction businesses for those questions. So where I do not have a reasonably good sample size, I have taken the data out. Okay, and then capacity utilization now stands at about 23.7%, which again is very similar to where we were in the 3rd quarter. So there has not been a massive increase in capacity utilization. And as I said, services sector is key to the UK recovery, because it constitutes 80% of the economy. So that's capacity utilization. And then what about labor market data? Now, so the background is we have cash flow problems, we have capacity utilization, which is on the lower side, business confidence, etc. All of those measures are lower than they were in the 3rd quarter. And naturally, unemployment is also on the rise. Now, we have heard that from national data sources. And in this quarter, again, similar to the cash flow positions and the capacity utilization. So when capacity utilization goes up, there is a possibility that employment will go up. And that's what has happened in the case of the construction sector. So from manufacturing and services, the picture is in the opposite direction. So businesses in those sectors are likely to report that they have reduced workforce in the last 3 months. But then when it comes to the forward outlook for the next 3 months, businesses across all 3 sectors are reporting that they may not necessarily increase their headcount. So it may be that they have reached a sort of optimum capacity, or it might mean businesses expect the activity, the trading conditions to not improve significantly. And just that on a little note on that chart on the extreme right. So these are workforce additions taken from both the QES and the recovery tracker. So you can see that the picture has been negative, consistently negative since September. That's when really the issue of redundancies, etc., started taking place. So you may remember the debate around the Chancellor announcing the extension to the furlough in November. And we have had comments in the survey saying, we had just completed our redundancy processes. We had laid off staff. Had the Chancellor made that announcement 2 or 3 weeks ago, we could have actually put those staff on furlough and then waited for trading conditions to improve in the new year. So unfortunately, that announcement came too late for many people, it would seem. And so workforce additions across Greater Manchester at the moment. Now, this is not to say that businesses aren't recruiting. There are certainly some businesses which are recruiting. I'm very keen to hear your experience. Your on-the-ground intelligence is extremely valuable as an added layer over the data. So please do let us know your comments and questions. But it would seem that across the economy as a whole, the prospects for increases in workforce are not very good at the moment. So the balance is at minus 6.6, a negative. Which means more businesses are saying that they are less likely to recruit, or that they will actually actively decrease their headcount. Okay, can we verify that workforce data with national data? Again, we can. I've got 3 charts in this. So in a couple of the slides coming ahead, there are loads of charts, but I just want to make some high-level points before I get to a couple of discussions later. Okay, so the Greater Manchester quarterly economic survey data is showing that businesses are actually reducing their headcount. Across the economy, there are now more businesses who are reducing their workforce, which must mean that redundancies are going up and unemployment is going up. That's absolutely bang on, because you can see that significant jump in redundancies across the country. I do not have data for Greater Manchester yet. This is based on national data sets from the Office for National Statistics. But across the UK, redundancies have gone up significantly. And so the data which was released, labor market data, which was released yesterday, shows that nearly 820,000 people have lost their jobs since March. And that's a huge number. And the OBR, the Office for Budgetary Responsibility, expects unemployment to touch 6.5%, 7% at its peak. But then they also assume, when they make that unemployment forecast, that there might be a smooth Brexit transition. And so if there is no smooth Brexit transition, in other words, if there is no deal between the UK and the EU in about 15 days time, then the possibility of further economic damage and further unemployment remains high. So we need to work on that deal. This is for the UK government to do, of course, but that is extremely important for employment prospects. Okay, redundancies have gone up. We get that. How does that translate in terms of job seekers allowance or universal credit claimants? And again, you can see that massive jump in universal credit claimants between March and April. Two criteria for universal claimants. Unemployment is one, but then reduction in income is another. So it is also likely that many people have actually lost income during the pandemic, and that translates into a much higher number of universal credit claimants. That line seems to be flattening at the moment for all three age groups, but then it is significantly higher than where it was in November 2019 or even in March 2020. Likewise, there has been a significant increase in the number of job seekers allowance claimants. So from the other sectors, but nowhere near as high as that. So my expectation is that Greater Manchester GDA will decrease by well over 15%. It could be as high as 20% if the worst case scenario comes out true, which will be hard Brexit causing lots of chaos. And then, if we have further restrictions for a much longer period of time. So that's on the demand recovery outlook. I then want to turn to some of the other issues that we have encountered. Now, I'm calling this the Economic Truth Index. Actually, I'm not calling it. Clive christened it as the Economic Truth Index. And essentially what we are trying to do is to bust some myths around GDP, productivity, the high street resilience, and so on. Okay, completely understand. This slide is full of charts, but I'll try and go through it one by one very quickly. So what is it that I'm trying to counter here? So two things have been mentioned, and I've heard many policymakers, even attention in the media being given to this. So one was that the UK has had the highest growth in the third quarter of 2020. Actually, that is not entirely true, because this chart here shows growth in Q2 2020, the green bar, growth in Q2 2020 for a few countries, and then growth in Q3 2020. So growth in the UK was on par with what other countries have experienced. So you can see that the gap is roughly 4%, 3 to 4% between the decline in the second quarter and the improvement in the third quarter. So it is on par. But something else is also true. It is the UK that suffered the worst contraction in the second quarter of 2020 amongst the G7 countries, and also lower than the OECD average. The UK suffered the worst contraction, and so the growth of 15.5% has not actually meant significant real increase in economic activity compared to pre-pandemic levels. And as I was saying earlier, the economy is still sort of 8% lower across the board. Okay, so that's one thing that I have said. So please do remember, the UK did have growth of 15.5%, but it is not that the UK had the highest growth amongst the advanced economies. it was if anybody has to claim that crown, then that would be France, because France had a 20% growth in the third quarter of Q3 of 2020. Okay. The other issue that I have heard is about productivity, and this is somewhat mysterious. So many commentators have said that productivity actually increased during the pandemic, and some people also pointed out the survey results and to indicate that. No, productivity has not increased during the pandemic. So let's look at these two charts first. So first thing, the UK lags behind the OECD countries average and the G7 countries average on productivity. So there is a significant gap on UK productivity relative to the productivity of other advanced economies. That's number one. How are we doing in Greater Manchester? Now, Greater Manchester has had a productivity deficit compared to the national average. So the dark line here is a national average. The green line is the Greater Manchester productivity levels. And then London's productivity is the highest, as you would expect, because of financial services. So there is a productivity deficit for Greater Manchester compared to the rest of the country. The latest data point is 2018. I do not have data for for 2019 and 2020 yet, but we can guess. Okay, so that's productivity measured as a GDP per hour worked for the whole economy. Now, what did happen during the third quarter? In the third quarter, there was a marginal increase in output per hour worked. So productivity is usually expressed in two ways: output per hour worked in pounds, or it is measured in outputs per capita. So it's GVA per person. Okay, so in the third quarter, there was this marginal decline. So if you look into that bottom chart on the right-hand side here, there was a marginal increase. So the average over the last several quarters for output per hour worked has been 35 pounds. That was the same in 2020 Q1. In Q2, it declined to 34.70p, and then it increased slightly to 36.5. Now, sometimes it may be that people are pointing out to this data to say, oh, productivity has actually increased during the pandemic. And my counterpoint is, you see the significant decline in quarterly GVA. So 473 billion GVA in the first quarter of 2020, declining to 379 billion, so almost a 96 billion decline in the second quarter, a slight increase of about 60 billion in the third quarter. Okay, so GVA declined and then slightly increased, as we have seen in the GDP growth number of 15.5%. But here is something else which is interesting. So this is the number of hours worked across the UK by everybody in a quarter. On average, it is at about 13.4 billion hours worked across the UK, the entire workforce, declining to 10.9 and then slight pickup to 12 in the third quarter. So this 36.5 is actually very misleading, because it just reflects the fact that the number of hours worked across the economy has significantly declined compared to the first quarter of 2020. We know that because the data says so, number one, but we also know that because redundancies have increased, the prospects for employment have gone down. And of course, many businesses have started reducing the number of hours. So if it's a hospitality business, perhaps, or even professional services, the number of hours that a person is actually employed for has slightly declined. Okay, so that's one bit. Now, the second thing I wanted to bust was this issue of high street growth and the retail sales. But essentially, in the interests of time, I'm just going to skip over this. But the recent increase in the recent increase in retail sales is not enough to save the high street, because there are some fundamental challenges that the high street is dealing with. And I'm going to finish here now. So this is my last slide. So, our economic outlook for Greater Manchester, I presented that in one of the earlier charts. I also said that I expect Greater Manchester gross value add to decline by well over 15% in this year, 2020 calendar year. So what does that mean for the UK? Now, the UK is facing this dual blow that I was talking about earlier, the combination of COVID and Brexit. Now, the OBR expects that the impact of COVID on its own will mean 11.3% reduction to UK GDP in 2020. But that 11.3% reduction assumes a smooth Brexit transition. In other words, 11.3% decrease if and only if we have secured a deal. But it also says that there will be a permanent damage of between 3 and 6%, depending on their various scenarios. Best case scenario, 3% permanent damage to the UK economy. Worst case scenario, 6% permanent damage to the UK economy, depending on infection spread and the requirement for response measures. But COVID-19 support has cost 280 billion, and the budget deficit is increasing, 394 billion now, approximately 20% of GDP. That's a significant increase. But that's just the impact of COVID. What about Brexit? Now, the OBR also says the long-term reduction in output from Brexit is going to be 4%. That's on top of the impact from COVID. So Brexit can cause a further 4% damage, assuming a free trade agreement is agreed between the UK and the EU. But if, as it looks like it, the chances for an increasing for a no deal scenario, then that will decrease output by a further 2%. So COVID and Brexit, that dual blow, is going to cause a permanent economic damage, permanent scarring to the extent of 16–17% of GDP in this and that in the next few months. But the long-term impact could be moderated. But as I was saying, non-tariff barriers will come up for UK businesses that want to deal with the EU. Now, you might have heard commentators say that the EU is protectionist, and there is an element of truth in that. The EU is protectionist in its economic policies. But until the 31st of December, the UK has actually been benefiting from the protectionism that the EU has implemented. But once we start losing those benefits, we will become a victim of the protectionism of the EU. And that's what I call the non-tariff barriers. And, the OBR actually surprisingly said, neither the government nor businesses are fully prepared for the imminent changes, even if a deal is agreed. And so, the combination of COVID and Brexit is that there will be a fundamental restructuring of the economy. It will reduce the absorptive capacity, and it will reduce unemployment. It will increase employment opportunities, or that's the problem that we are facing. Lower employment, a smaller economy, severe constraints to supply chain, in addition to the restrictions that we have had in place for COVID. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Chris. But I'll just say one final comment. Long has been my desire to come to one of these events and give a fully positive message. Today is not that day, but that day might come. But as I was saying earlier, my job is to be true to the data. I want to be true to the data, and I want to present the hard facts. And we want your views and intelligence so that we can combine that in the policy responses that we use, but also in lobbying government for additional business support, ensuring that they are actually doing what will help businesses rather than hinder the business activity levels. Okay, I'll hand over back to Chris now. Chris.
Okay, thanks very much, Subrah, for that. And again, I hear what you're saying, and I know you said it previously about wanting to give some positive news, but as we've got to be realistic, we've got to be honest, and we've just got to reflect what again, businesses are telling us and what we're seeing happen out there in the world. I think the only good thing to say is that hopefully you didn't start off that presentation saying, well, this is the good news. Obviously, that is very, very worrying seeing and seeing it presented in that way. But again, it is the reality. Just a couple of things, really. You used the phrase a perfect cocktail, which I thought summarised the everything coming together in the way it is at present. Obviously, if you have too many cocktails, you can suffer a tremendous hangover. In your view, I mean, you know, we've talked in the past, haven't we, about a V-shaped recovery and all this sort of thing. And you put a slide up there saying it's anything but. How long will the hangover from this potentially last? And it's probably a bit of a curveball, a hospital pass of a question there, but we're seeing all sorts of numbers. And again, you know, a couple of weeks ago, the Chancellor stood up to give his winter economic plan with figures saying, you know, 2022 is going to look like this, 2023 is going to look like this. How much faith do you put in those figures? Or are we at a point where really we're sort of having to say, well, you know, we can only really look 6 months, 12 months in the future?
Any forecast that comes out at this time has to be dealt with a little bit of pessimism, with a pinch of salt, if I might say. And the reason for that is twofold. One, we do not know what types of restrictions we want to manage the public health situation, how long we want those restrictions for. So that makes forecasting a bit harder.
Yeah.
And the second reason is, of course, what's going to happen with Brexit. You know, we know that Brexit is going to have an adverse impact. Are we going to get a deal? Are we not going to get a deal? If we get a deal, what sort of preparation from must businesses do, etc., etc. So any forecasting is difficult at this moment. Now, I can only forecast, you know, based on our data, we can do it for Greater Manchester. But nationally, we rely on what the Office for Budget Responsibility has said. So they have looked at the consensus view for recovery forecasts from various sources, including the Bank of England, the OECD, etc. And what they say is, we are not going to have a real growth in the economy. So the economy is not going to go to the levels that it was pre-pandemic until 2023 beginning. And you know, that's the hard reality that we face. So there has been this permanent damage. So 2023 is the most likely scenario for the economy to actually start expanding. But there is one challenge there. I had a couple of other slides, but I didn't go through them, which is, I mentioned the term absorptive capacity. We're going to have lots of people who have lost jobs. There is the fundamental restructuring of the economy. You know, retail will become smaller. The high street is going to become smaller. What are the solutions in place for people in those sectors? You know, in terms of employment opportunities, in terms of skills upgrades, etc. And at the same time, we need investment elsewhere, because we are probably going to have to look for employment opportunities for 3-4 million people. If that is the case, where are those new jobs going to be? So we need significant amount of investment in the economy as well, in addition to the training, the skills, etc.
Okay, and that is, again, it's another part of that cocktail, isn't it? You know, it's at any one time you could sort of absorb some of this, but when you're faced with 3 or 4 big things like this, that's when the pressure really comes. If anybody has got any questions, we've got about five minutes or so left. If anybody has got any questions you want to ask, please use the chat box facility in there, and I'll pick that up. Well, one of the other issues I think as well that's quite important, and again we've not really asked the question about this, but it's something that will loom ever more so, I think, in the next 12 months, is that level of debt burden as well that businesses are facing themselves with. And again, this is another brake on investment, isn't it? We've seen a lot of government response to COVID being in the form of guaranteed loan schemes, which are all well and good, but the clue is in the title, isn't it? It's a loan, it's got to be repaid back. Is that a concern that we're seeing businesses saddling themselves with huge amounts of debt, which at some stage over the next 12 months will possibly fall due for repayment? And what impact could that have on the recovery?
Okay, yes, correct. So businesses have been saddled with a lot of debt. So indebtedness has gone up. These loan schemes were to take out reasonably generous, because 0% interest for 12 months. You can start repaying much later, and of course we have to remember, most businesses, although there is a small number of businesses who have actually taken out those loans, soft loans, for the purpose of investment as compared to regular commercial credit, but the majority of the businesses have taken out the loans to tide over day-to-day trading activities, which is significantly different from actually somebody borrowing to invest. Mm. So that has meant a significantly high proportion of debt amongst the commercial businesses. cash flow reserves, even with that additional debt, cash flow reserves have gone low. As I said, the balances for the whole of Greater Manchester is somewhere near minus 31, 32 at the moment. So businesses are facing low cash reserves. The key constraint that will emerge when it is time to start repaying those debts, and Chris, let's remember, it's not just the debts that have to be repaid. Many businesses have actually postponed a VAT and deferred other tax liabilities. So all of these repayments are due to start at roughly the same time. And so we're going to see a significant hit to liquidity and cash flow pressures emerging at that time. So the conclusion that I draw is that the prospects for further investment within the business, whether it is on acquiring new plant and machinery, on acquiring technology, these are important for improving productivity, for example. So those types of investments are less likely to take place in 2021 and 2022. And I think that's the key concern, because that will then have a depressing effect on the job market. It will have a depressing effect on overall economic growth, increase in earnings and wages, and so on.
Okay. Thanks very much, Subrah. I'm not aware that there's any questions. Conscious we've just got a couple of minutes left, and I just want to draw things together here and just tie things up a little bit. Subrah, thank you very much for once again. The information and data that we get from members is absolutely priceless in things like this, and it's so important that we've got somebody like yourself to sort of pull it all together, and like you said, remain honest to what it's actually saying. And I think the sort of truthful bit in this is absolutely crucial, because there's an awful lot of nonsense being taught by an awful lot of people at present over some of these numbers. They don't quite understand them. They just grab a headline and then blast that out as though it is reality. I think it's absolutely vital, the work that you do and the constant support we get from our members as well on this to give that accurate figure of what's actually going on in the local economy. So thank you very much for that. Just a couple of things. I mean, obviously, times could be better. I think it's safe to say there's an understatement, and things can appear quite gloomy or whatever. But obviously, with the support of members and completing that survey and giving us that information, and also in regular contact that we've got through, our membership team and other staff at the Chamber, that we do speak to businesses on a regular basis. We're speaking to hundreds of businesses every single week. So it's vital we just pull in this information, but we do something with it. Early in the new year, we're going to be relaunching our campaign for business, our campaigns there around connectivity and innovation, around skills, workplaces, and also green growth as well. So look out for that. And we'll be using a lot of the information that we've talked about today to help support those campaigns and make sure that no matter what 2021 throws at us, we're in the best place in the Greater Manchester business community to stand strong, stand firm, support each other, and make sure that whatever gets thrown at us, we can withstand it and come out stronger on the other end. It will be tough. We're not going to pretend it anything other than that. But by working together, by supporting each other and helping each other, we can be in a much better position than if we didn't do that. So all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for everyone joining us today. We will be recording it. We'll be broadcasting it. Look out in the brief later on this afternoon for all the information. We'll be sending out the presentation to you. If you want any further information, please get in touch with Subrah and myself, one of your account managers, whoever at the Chamber. And basically, enjoy Christmas, enjoy your break over the new year, and look forward to seeing you all again in 2021. So thank you very much. Enjoy yourself and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.